Reading with your kids.
Hey, so great to see you. Come on in. Hi, my name is Jet Li, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are absolutely delighted that you're a part of our beautiful Reading with Your Kids family. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you find your podcast. You can also find us on YouTube. Our guest today is Ellen Hopkins. She is here to celebrate her middle grade novel in verse, Closer to Nowhere. Before we invite Ellen in, we want to invite you to a great year in celebration, reading in the new year. That's right, we are saying goodbye and good riddance to 2020, saying hello to all the promise and happiness we are going to experience in 2021. We are creating 3 virtual stages where you and your family will be able to see authors from all around the world reading their books aloud. Fantastic performances and also some great do-it-together activities. We're also going to have a whole lot of free downloads that you and your kids can just celebrate together for hours and hours of offline fun. It's all happening starting Christmas morning, December 25th, running until January 1st, 2021. And then it's over. Then it's gone. The virtual stage, the stages will disappear. So be sure to bookmark readingintheNewYear.com. Here's just some of the authors that are going to be joining us. Adam Kargman, Allison Paul Klakowitz, Elwyn Onum, Laura Heiler, Adam Kratz, Shannon Anderson. Man, oh man, the list goes on and on. I'll be performing some magic. You're going to see some great classic magic performed by my kids. Oh, you don't want to miss it. Reading in the New Year. Go right now. Bookmark the page. readingintheNewYear.com. Joining us right now from Carson City in Nevada. She is the author of a great new middle grade novel written entirely in verse. Please welcome to the show the author of Closer to Nowhere, Ellen Hopkins. Ellen, how are you?
I'm doing great. You know, these times are strange, but you know, it's like we deal with it with humor and try not to be too obnoxious about everything.
It is really strange times, and boy, something that I think we'll be talking about for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, probably. You know, it's like everything is kind of on hold, but everything is also really busy because like I'm overseeing distance learning for 3 kids. So I'm doing that. I'm trying to revise a book, revise another book, and write a book. So it feels pretty busy.
Well, we want to add to your busyness and ask you to let us know what Closer to Nowhere is all about.
So Closer to Nowhere is, it's actually inspired by one of the kids' grandchildren that I've been raising for 7 years now, who came to us with some early childhood trauma, so some behavioral issues. And he's like this really great kid that people have a hard time warming up to. So I wanted to write a tribute for him. You know, he came to us in 4th grade and he's always had a hard time making friends, even though he has managed to work through all of the awful stuff that brought him into that space, and he's now in a really good space. So Closer to Nowhere is about this young man named Cal who comes to live with his cousin Hannah. Hannah's like the popular girl with Olympic dreams. She wants to be a gymnast, and Cal comes and he's her cousin, and she really can't deal with Cal's meltdowns and his lies and the things he has always done to survive, basically. But through the course of the book, they learn to not only accept each other, but love each other and redefine what family means to each other.
There are so many ways that I can relate to this. It's not an unusual situation. There's a lot of these type of family dynamics going on, more than I think most people realize.
Oh yeah, it's interesting. There's like 2 million grandparents raising grandchildren right now. So the book is not about grandparents, but it's about family that are forced to take. His mother has died, and his father is in jail, so he has nowhere to go really, and the family has to learn to deal with having another child in their space too. So the mom and dad kind of argue because they can't quite see eye to eye on how to deal with him. And, for Hannah, some of Hannah's friends like him and some of Hannah's friends don't like him. And so, it's just all these weird dynamics that come into play when, a family is augmented in this fashion, I guess.
Yeah. As much empathy as I kind of connected initially, right away with Cal, I can also have empathy, understanding for what Hannah's going through. It's not necessarily to be admired, but I understand it might be really disruptive and really difficult for a person like Hannah who has her life, is established, and she doesn't really have any say as to whether or not this person is coming into her family and really shaking things up.
For us, we also had a child here that kind of had to take his younger, not siblings, but cousins under his wing a little bit, and he was already kind of a teenager and going through some stuff anyway, regular teenage stuff, and so just the added layer of stress of having strangers really, and for him it was rough. So it was all of us having to work through this. And for Hannah, it's the same thing. It's, she's a really great kid. She's nice. She's a nice girl, but, it's just her life. She had an order to it. And, the book is it's in both voices. So you hear from both of them. And their sections are earmarked by, his are like fact or fiction, because for him, anytime the truth of his life is something he doesn't really want to share because it was so rough. So anytime people come too close to him or, they ask too many questions, he just makes stuff up. Like big lies. And they're funny, which is where we can get a little humor in the book. He just makes up big whoppers that, no way. And, but for Hannah, her sections are, definition of, because she wants everything in order. She wants to know how things work. She wants to know what things mean. So she's just solid and he's just not. And so it was a way of dividing the two sections, and they really make sense in that fashion, and for those kids being the kids that they are.
Yeah. Interesting. I want to get back to this idea of sections, but, you touched on something in both your life and in the fictional work Closer to Nowhere. There's a cousin that needs to come and live with the family, but in reality, even though there's blood connecting them, you're really talking about accepting a stranger into your home, and not just for a visit or a week or until the house gets remodeled. It's like we need to accept this stranger into our lives for the rest of our lives.
Right. And for him, on his side, it's hard for him to accept the help because he's been pushed aside, or he was actually on the street with an uncle for a little while. And so he doesn't know how to accept help really. He kind of resists it in a way, and that just makes things tougher again on the other side, and it's all very real, and it's all very, there's so many families that are dealing with, different kinds of, disruptions in their lives, especially now, but, to try to find the common ground, not only common ground, but to build love, and that takes a while, because Hannah had seen Cal, at family gatherings or whatever, reunions or whatever. So she'd probably seen him maybe a dozen times in her childhood up to the time he moves in. And she could only see what, he threw out there when they were out playing games, playing baseball or whatever, So to find out the hard parts of his life, and that's hard for her too, because her life has been so stable. So it's very difficult for her to relate but she learns to. And that's the thing. And that's what I really hope that readers get out of this book, is that it doesn't, whatever has happened in our past, there is a way forward. There's a way into a better space, into a happier place, into a more stable place. And it starts with acceptance and understanding. Yeah. And that's what we have to get to.
Well, one of the things we've talked about a lot here on the podcast is just how valuable reading together can be in helping kids develop empathy. And Closer to Nowhere sounds like a perfect resource for families to sit down and to have those discussions, to help our kids understand that there are many different sides to every situation and many different perspectives, and having the ability to place yourself into someone else's shoes and to try to look at different situations through those different perspectives can really be an incredibly valuable tool for us as we grow in our lives and as our kids grow into adulthood.
Right. And, and this idea too that, the kid in the corner that's having the meltdown, or, that looks like the freak, that's kind of like the word that everybody hates to use, but kids do use it. Uh-huh. That's not what he wants to be. He wants friends. He wants to be accepted. He just doesn't always know how. Mm-hmm. Or maybe he has, he needs extra help to be able to find his way to learning how. So, counseling and therapy and even just an expectation of that this is this family, they are accepting me, this is their rules, I have to learn to live by them. Mm-hmm. And that takes a while too. That's also when you live in a family that has no rules, that basically doesn't care what you're doing, to come into a space where, you have to be up at a certain time and, we eat dinner at a certain time. That all is an adjustment, and everybody has to adjust to each other in that space too.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Now, you're mentioning different sections of the book. As I received the book, it's a beautiful book. I wasn't able to read it, but as I glanced through it, it seems to be not so much a novel in verse in that it starts at page 1 and it's just one long continual poem, but it seems to be a collection of different poems. Am I right about that?
Right. Well, and verse novel is that. It uses all the beautiful language that poetry does, but it doesn't read like poetry. It reads like fiction. So there's dialogue in it. And, in the crafting part of that, it's taking, alliteration and assonance and all these things that you do when you write regular poetry, but you have to move it into, it's a marriage really with that and fiction. So it reads like fiction, but subconsciously you hear the beauty of the language. And for, kind of more reluctant readers, it's an accepting space to have, it feels good to have white space on the page. Mm-hmm. There are places that you can stop very easily to breathe, when things get a little tough. Yep. And so it appeals a lot to, non-readers and reluctant readers as well as good readers, but it's a place to start with kids that don't think they want to read. Mm-hmm.
And as I'm listening and as I'm reflecting on looking at the book, I know we, really, really encourage families to read together with their kids of all ages and talk about the benefits of reading aloud with older kids. A novel in verse seems like something that would be much more easier to read aloud together as a family or parent and child, just because it has that verse, and you can take turns reading the different verses and the different voices, and it just seems like it would be easier to read than a typical novel.
It is, and it's not it's not dense, so there's not. And they're not big, giant descriptions. That's one of the things that I really love about it. Actually, writing in verse is not easier than writing in prose. Reading it is easier, but it has a rhythm. There's a musicality to it. So a lot of young people that are drawn to music and lyrics and like that, they love the format. And I think parents will learn to like it. It's, cause like, I don't know exactly where we lose this love for poetry moving into adulthood, because, young kids, they love Shel Silverstein, they love poetry, and then you move through and you get older, and then it's like, oh, it's poetry, I wouldn't want to read that. And I think it's just this perception that adults have that poetry is hard to understand or whatever, and it's not.
Yeah, well, I think I'm always amazed at people. Now, I'm closing in on 100 years old. And I'm always amazed at my peers, the folks who graduated high school back, when I did. They're still listening to the music that we listened to way back when we were in high school. And it's like, okay, that's a nice nostalgia trip and everything. It's nice to hear every once in a while, but I don't want to hear it every day, and I don't want to be listening to it for the next, 50 years. But I think maybe that's it, whereas, some people, they just get stuck listening to that music that they heard, those rhymes set to music that they heard when they were in high school, and they don't progress and they don't listen to new music. Maybe that has something to do with it. I don't know. I'm just speculating here.
You never know. It could be. I don't know. I'm probably one of those old farts that listen to the same music over and over. But with kids in the house, I end up listening to music that I probably wouldn't have otherwise. Mm-hmm. The 20-something has forced heavy metal. And I don't mean just heavy, I mean death metal.
That death metal stuff. Yeah, that's
not much, but, and then the younger one, he's all into rap. So I'm listening to rap too, which I probably wouldn't necessarily have gone looking for it, but now it's here. I'll listen to it.
Yeah. Well, music's a big part of my life, and I've had the opportunity to sit down and talk to some incredible musicians and songwriters and develop friendships with them. And, they talk about how difficult it is writing 10 or 12 songs for an album. And those of you who are young, an album is this thing. You used to come out a collection of music on one disc, and it's before streaming. But anyways, you wrote many more than 12 verses for this novel. How many different sections are there? I really couldn't tell you. I mean, it's fairly long page-wise. It's fairly long page-wise, but again, there are fewer words on the page, so it's a fast read. And I've written, prior to this, I've written 14 young adult novels in verse, 2 adult novels in verse, and then some prose stuff as well. But so it's something I'm well practiced at. It's something that comes naturally to me now, and I think, and I love it. I love the challenge of making every word count on the page. I love being able to create that musicality on the page, and some of the poems actually there is a visual element as well too, like they break up into interesting patterns on the page or whatever. Right. So that's kind of fun too. Now, you mentioned early on that, writing in verse is not easier than writing in prose. Why? And you said that now it comes naturally to you, but I'm imagining initially it was very, very challenging. Why did you decide to make that choice to write in this more challenging way?
So my first verse novel is called Crank, and that was actually the seeds of that story are the reasons why we're raising grandchildren, which is that one of my daughters fell into meth addiction. And so when I wanted to write her story, and not her story exactly, right? Because I fictionalize enough to pull away from real life as much as we can to kind of give people a little space, Mm-hmm. But, I wanted to write her story in her point of view, so that I could kind of get inside her head to figure out why she made the choices she did. And I started that book in prose, and I've been writing poetry my whole life anyway. I started that book in prose, and it was my voice and not the character's voice. And so, another verse novelist, I did a workshop with her, and she had done a book about her sister's schizophrenia, so a very personal story again that she wrote in verse. And I'm like, I'm going to try this. And I tried it, and it worked, and it clicked, and I built an audience fairly quickly because they loved what I did with that book. Mm-hmm. And so, and again, it was poetry is how the poet views the world, right? It's a very interior way of writing. And so it pulls you inside the characters because they're basically the poets, right? They're doing the writing, they're the poets. And so, it pulls you inside their heads so specifically, that it's a very intimate, you feel like you're living the story rather than you're being told the story, if that makes sense to you. Cause you're so deeply inside the character.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that I try to share with folks is that, reading, whether it's prose or whether it's verse, it is a much more intimate experience with the characters than you would get watching, the same story in movie form or a television series. You actually get into the mind of the character and you hear those thoughts. And that's a really powerful experience.
It is, and especially for kids and that's, what I'm trying to do is help them develop empathy. And so if the readers can get inside these characters' heads, they can't help but develop some empathy and understanding for these kids. They just can't help it.
It sounds like in some ways you started writing as kind of a therapy for yourself to help you deal with some of the difficult emotions you were feeling because of everything that was happening around you.
It was cathartic for me. And I was a freelance journalist, and then I moved into children's nonfiction. So even before I started writing fiction, I had published 20 nonfiction books for young readers. So I knew I wanted to write for a younger audience. I like writing on the adult side too, but if I had to choose, I would stay with Kid Lit because, I feel like I can help shape a more positive future by writing books that give young people an understanding of tough subject matter, but by doing it in a way that makes them not feel afraid of it, but wants to embrace the learning part of that as well.
Do you ever get pushback from either teachers or parents, saying, "Hey, this is this subject matter is way, way, way too heavy for middle grade readers to tackle"?
Well, on the YA side, it's pretty heavy, and yeah, I've gotten some pushback for sure. But the middle grade is not like that at all. The middle grade is very specifically written for younger readers, and it's not a frightening walk. But it is I think it's an important walk, and I really, really hope that parents will find this book and, as you suggested, read it with their young people because it will help the parents as well. I think.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many, especially now. I haven't said it for a while, but we're still in this pandemic, and we're recording this right now at the very beginning of November when. After the country started to reopen, different parts of the country are locking down again because the infection rate here in Boston, the infection rate is going through the roof, and they're talking about, stopping, inside dining, and schools are going virtually going virtual again. And, we're all going through this pandemic together, but we're not all in the same boats. There are kids that are blessed to be in a stable family situation, and then there are other kids that, the best of times are difficult for them. But thrown in a pandemic when folks are out of work and they're struggling for food and how to pay rent and they're worried about being evicted, that's a whole nother scenario. So I think more than ever, it's a wonderful time for families to sit down and just start talking about the fact that we may be in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. And that holds true for pandemic times and the best of times. Life is not the same. It's not fair, and we have to have empathy for others.
That's right. And this times are fraught. That's for sure. It's been, I don't know. And I'm sorry that we pulled away from each other as people. because of being on whatever side of the political aisle. And it didn't used to be like that. But I think it's more because a lot of people are running a little afraid, a little scared right now. And the thing about that this time for me has been like lockdown with the kids and everything is teaching them to bake and teaching them to garden and doing things that when I'm a busy author, I don't always have as much time for. So I chose to kind of embrace this time period and spend the time with my family that I might not otherwise have had. And I've learned a lot about them, and I think, I'm not sure everything they've learned about me is good, but I hope it's mostly good, you know?
Yeah. Well, I know here, my kids are grown and have their own homes and are away from Boston, but my niece and I have been very busy building grills and fire pits and putting the pool back together and gardening and all that other stuff. So yes, it is a tough time, but if we choose to use the time to grow closer with our kids, I think that's a blessing.
I think so too, and I think books are a great way to do that. Mm-hmm. We can learn things through books, we can teach things with books, and we can just enjoy the journey that, the books take us on, and doing it together with our kids, I think is just like, that's a blessing. Yeah. That really is a blessing.
Yeah. You mentioned that you've written a number of different novels, both in verse and prose, for YA and middle grade authors. Where can folks go to learn more about Closer to Nowhere and learn more about all of the wonderful books from Ellen Hopkins?
My website is ellenhopkinsbooks.com. You can find most of them there. I think all of them there. And there also are, social media links. And you're welcome to message me. I try to get back on messages.
Well, we've had a wonderful time speaking with the author of Closer to Nowhere, Ellen Hopkins. Ellen, thanks so much for being part of the show.
Thank you for having me. It's been great to be here.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Neil Thompson. He'll be here to celebrate his wonderful book, Why Is My Hair Curly? It's a great way to get kids interested in themselves and also in the STEM field. Yeah, it's really cool. That's the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Hey, you know what else is really cool? Reading in the New Year. That's right, our virtual family literacy event happening Christmas Day through New Year's Day. Go to readingintheNewYear.com, bookmark the page. Be sure to join us when everything starts in just a few days. Hey, I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to thank our guest, Ellen Hopkins. Be sure to check out Closer to Nowhere. Also want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. I want to thank you. This has been a year like no other, and you have been magnificent during this year. That's one of the reasons we created Reading in the New Year. We want to celebrate all the wonderful things you did, all the wonderful challenges you faced and beat. You're amazing. Thank you so much. You're making the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.